Stop night. Peace, human families of the planet Earth. Welcome once again to Super Heru Radio. I am your host, Aseer the Duplicateers, along with my co-host, Selena, the Empress of 10,000 Years, and the more here.
What's up? Happy Big New Year. Happy Big New Year.
Wants to let everybody know, everybody know who's in the know, what's really going on. So this is a fiscal New Year for those people who didn't know, so it doesn't make a difference. People are going to get drunk and party anyway, and they should. This is the time where people need to have as much fun as they can possibly have, because things is getting progressively iller from here. You know what I mean? But again, it's been great. Oh, wow. It's been great, and I just want to say peace to everybody who still celebrates any of the holidays or the holidays that just passed. You know what I'm saying? Going all the way back from, I guess, Halloween to now. So for the fact that most of the species mind pattern, even though subconsciously they may know what time it really is, this is for those who are celebrating it now. Just want to say, be safe while you're out there. Don't get caught out there too many different places, you know what I'm saying? Because tonight is a heavy night, so even though we know what time it really is, there are people who still invest energy and time into it. And that's what makes anything real in this reality. That's why so many non-physical, aberrant things are able to function in this reality, because we live in a state of almost perpetual static flux, where things that are unreal can become real based upon people giving wisdom or knowledge or breath or energy to it. You know what I mean? These are where things that we refer to as thought forms truly manifest from. So we have to be ever clear and diligent in the fact of what it is we subscribe and give our energy to, even when we know better. You know what I mean? Because when you know better, it's actually even harder to a degree. You know what I mean? And one thing I'm understanding about this reality is that whatever you into, whatever you say that you are, stuff, you got to declare that. Because if not, people are going to confer what it is they think you are on you, and that's not cool. So definitely want to give respect to the honored dead. We lost a great, valiant Moor. For those people who never heard of him or didn't know, his name is Uriel Bey, or Prince Uriel Bey, the Prince. He started what's called the Talismanic Kingdom of Alamatarium, I believe it was called, Altamarium, or Altamarium, Morium, don't want to butcher the name, but this brother was one of our greatest linguists in terms of the talismanic power of Latin, of Moorish Latin, or what they call Latimer. He was an extensive teacher on that, you know what I mean? And we lost a great luminary in terms of somebody who really knew how to freak the old tongue, you know what I mean? They say Latin is a dead language because nobody speaks it, or you can't speak it because it's dead. But remember, anytime the devil or a cracker or a black devil or a white cracker want to tell you something that you can't do, or that something is dead, you better find out for yourself. 10 chances to 1, these niggas is not trying to put you on to something that can help you out of your position. So again, Latin is a dead language in a sense because people are not speaking it openly anymore. But remember, Latin was also spoken in the old Roman Republic, actually, as they inherited it out of the old Phoenician, which again we know is Carthaginian text and energy, that brought all of this modern, what we call phonetics, into modern times for us to be speaking things today. So what that means, brothers and sisters, is that whether it's Latin or English or Pig Latin or whatever, the language comes alive when you speak it. That's why as much as they wanted you to become grammatically correct, speak proper English, what you got to remember is that the English at the time that was speaking, quote-unquote, the King's English, was just as dark, if not darker than you. So these were not Caucasian people coming to teach you how to talk and all of that. Remember, you're the one who taught them. And it's unfortunate that in 2013 we still got to go over foregone conclusions and obvious reversals of fortune like that. But if we don't declare, remember, this reality will confer. So in that, you have to always know the fact. Always know who you are and where your history is in it, because Noble Moore told me, and this is one of the truest things I ever heard in my life. The Moore told me, if they are not talking about birthright, nationality, inheritance, and uplift of fallen humanity, then they are your sworn enemy. You hear that? They are your sworn enemy. You got to remember, everybody on this little ball of earth has been trying to denationalize you since you basically moved everybody into the future, or what we consider the future in terms of the present time. And the torchbearers of everything that every culture got on this planet, everyone, I don't give a damn who they are, all of them got something from you as an Asiatic being. Because as it is said in the Moorish 101, when he asked, what is your race? It says that your race is Asiatic, which didn't say anything about being a human. And I asked people in a workshop I did the other day, I asked them, I said, well, go into the Quran, go into the Bible, go into the Rig Veda, go into the Dhammapada, and look for the word human and see if you find it in it. We got to start to put things into a greater perspective, because what we perceive to be what we are may not be that. And this is a time when all bets is off. So the genetic memory of who everybody was and who everybody wanted to be, has already been switched up. So you have a lot of people living other people's culture and reality, and it really is not theirs. And all that's doing is leading more confusion and more people being disenfranchised and migrated out of their original culture. And these things are actively killing us on a spiritual level, because each one of us has a divine mission that was sent by the species mind pattern in terms of our species and our parental or hereditament, or genetical hereditament, which basically represents who and what we have always been. And you cannot you can alter your genetics, but it don't change the fact that where those genetics actually began. Understand? So, if your great ancestor was grafted from a cat, a rat, and a dog, then that means that you got cat, rat, and dog in you. You understand? If your ancestor was manifested out of a Neanderthal, meaning a protoplasmic form of being that eventually would grow into what we call a human, then that means you got caveman in you today, which would explain why certain people are more hairy than others, which would explain why certain people are more savage and more ready to kill and maim and rape than others, right? Why so many people are still traveling or feel isolated, even though they got all the money in the damn world, they still want it more, because what they feel was never enough, because there was never a point where genetically in an ancestral realm, when they was basically on all fours, feeding and eating grubs and shrubs and all that, running from the bears and the beasts that was trying to eat them up, they never felt safe. And so they passed that down into their genetic line in this form of cave trauma that starts to represent itself now in our time in terms of xenophobia and cave trauma and isolation syndrome and all this shit. Where do you think this stuff comes from? You dig what I'm saying? So what this means is that when they tell you that all men are created equal, yes, all men are created equal, but they didn't say all humans was created equal, did they? So if that's the case, and if everybody's a man or come from man, then who's mankind? And if that's not mankind, then who's the human? You see what I'm saying? The origins of our species as a constant in quasi-physical reality is what we descend and come from. Therefore, Atlantis then is a perpetual state that in modern terms we refer to as the state of Morocco, because Atlantis, I'm not talking about the kingdom of Morocco founded in 1956 7. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the ever-present Al-Moroccan dynasty that has existed all the way from time immemorial. That existed 50,000 years before you even knew that there was such a place called North Africa or a place that they call so-called Morocco, because it is a perpetual state, meaning a perpetual state of being, something that you are always in, regardless to where you are. Because, like I said, genetically you cannot alter what your forefathers were. And the original people who peopled the Al-Moroccan Empire that goes all the way back to, let's say, the Lemurian, Atlantean, Moorish Empire, those people were Asiatics. Again, no humans. You dig? So all you got to do is look at movies like Clash of the Titans and shit and see that you existed at the same time and all these things was, but there was no place called Greece then. So where were you at? If it wasn't Greece, then we got to go back to Etrusca. Let's look at where the Vatican is today. The Vatican itself is built on Vatican Hill. Vatican Hill is named after the goddess Vatica, who is named after the goddess of death in the Etruscan dynasty. Therefore, the Etruscan dynasty, right, or the Etruscan empires or whatever, they would take they dead to Vatican Hill or to the hill of Vatica to be buried. This is why they built the Vatican on top of it, because it is a spiritual practice to you to build your edifices, spiritual edifices, on places of heavy spiritual power, which are either mosques or cemeteries. Therefore, the Black Pope, the so-called death cult of the so-called Vatican that is there in Italy and Rome or whatever, is basically built itself, again, on a cemetery, which then shows you why they have to have so many blood sacrifices to satiate all of the ancient, our ancestors that they built this shit on top of, as a way to bind the souls of the ancient Etruscan ancestors that they remodeled and relabeled as Greek, so that way they can whitewash them and get the residual energy of them through this fake edifice while disenfranchising us out of the blessing of acknowledging them, of the blessing that you get when you acknowledge the dead, when you acknowledge your ancestors. So, like I said, brothers and sisters, this is the time for us to accept the fact that this is the new world, that this is the new world as it is ordered for you to be and for you, and where you want it to be. It's not based on what it is these so-called skull and bonesmen is doing. These bonesmen are basically your undertakers. They're basically playing the role of the 72 conspirators that you see in the glyph of Asar weighing the soul as it goes into the underworld, whether or not it's the soul going to get ate up by a pep. A pep is the beast, right? Almost like a crocodile with like a lion's body, you know, like goat feet or something. But either way, all of these mythological creatures and all of this so-called legendary or mythic history that you're talking about is actually your direct history. And because of that, they have disenfranchised that from you because, remember, you are a slave from Africa, and that's all you are. And so because of that, you have to then accept the designation African American to acknowledge the fact that you are that. But in my research into the term African American, it's very funny how it relates to denationalization, believe it or not. Oh, yeah. That's interesting. An African American is one that is naturalized in America, which is very funny, being the fact that there's two naturalizations going on. There's something called naturalization, and then there's something called nationalization. We as Moors could never be naturalized into the citizenry of the United States, even though a lot of us have been, because we were already here. You see what I'm saying? But the problem, like I said, is that you got everybody vying to be from somewhere else because for some reason we were trained to believe it's more profitable and more acceptable to be seen as something else. So the instinctive trait that we had as children of making fun of each other because, when we call each other African, things like that, this was a way for our, let's say, indigenous or let's say our ancestors here or felt that they was here to manifest their discontent with how we was rocking based upon the misinformation. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with being from Africa or being African American if that's what you want to be. All I'm saying is just be that if that's what you're choosing and know what that comes with. African American, according to Beauvair's dictionary, basically says that it's a person born on the continent of Africa who becomes a naturalized citizen of the United States of America. Most commonly misused word, albeit one deemed politically correct by people afraid to use words like black or colored, describing the black population of the United States of America. So here go the quote they used for it, which is funny. The quote was, while Tanisha thought she was African American, she was born right here in Lower Alabama. So what did that say? What does that mean? That means then that African American is somebody who's been naturalized to believe an African American is really an American American who's been naturalized in the United States to believe they come from Africa by way of America. You hear what I'm saying? An African American is an American American, meaning a Moorish American, who has been naturalized in the United States to believe that their ancestry came from Africa, even though all of their relatives and ancestry is found right here. Look at that, man. Look at that. And this is what people are still using to describe themselves now. Still, right now. Right? So then I looked up an African, right? And it says an individual whose recent ancestry, meaning in the past 50 years, is from the continent of Africa, in contrast with African American, right? So when you do the knowledge to this, you see that this is what it is, right? But wait, there's something else, though. When you read the Moore Circle 7 Quran and start to get into your history and talks about the boundaries of your empire, right? Let me see, let me get that for you. Excuse me. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Now, in the Circle 7 Quran, it says Egypt, the capital empire of the dominion of Africa, meaning that Africa was a dominion, meaning that it was a parent empire outside of the African that was over it, okay? This is where you get into the lost tribe of Shabazz and all this other stuff, okay?
My kid was home screaming and crying for 4 or 5 hours straight. Somebody would call it yes, right?
Right.
This dog could just stay and scream and bark 4 hours straight. We have no control of it. I'm just supposed to put up with that, so I'm being lucky for him. But say you got to take care of your animal. He doesn't want to be home by himself, and I'm not suffering.
And this is what it is. You know what I mean? Yeah, let's write it on there.
I have a piece of paper there. That's going to be hard to take for this book. I'm just saying, just stuff.
When you read it, it says, the inhabitants of Africa are the descendants of the ancient Canaanites from the land of Canaan. This is Genesis 13:15, right? What this basically represents then is Canaan. Now, depending upon your relationship or understanding of the land of Canaan, if you believe that the land of Canaan is what they now today call Jerusalem, and not understanding that the place that was Canaan, that became Jerusalem, was a satellite kingdom from ancient Canaanites that were from the land of Canaan, meaning the land of Nod, meaning the land of the node, or the land of the Set, where we are now, as Canaan, North, Central, and South Mexico, otherwise known as Northwest Africa, right? So in that, then, that would mean then that the original inhabitants of the place that we call Africa actually came from over here first, if we're going by what the Bible says. And if we're going by what the Bible says, we're not going by it based upon a Christian understanding. We're going to it basically based upon an ancient Moorish understanding of the four gates, right? So in that, a lot of us sometimes have issues with the term Canaanite because we look at that as idol worshippers. But if you look at that now, a lot of the so-called descendants of the modern Canaanites have turned into idol worshippers. And these are the American idols. These are the people that have been propped up to you, that are born here or from here geographically, but have been trying to make you believe that you are from somewhere else. That's why it is the way it is now, you know. But as we get further into things and we start to clarify who is what and who is what, we then go to the second part of that says, Old Man Cush and his family are the first inhabitants of Africa who came from the land of Canaan. Genesis 10:6, Genesis 9:18, Genesis 10:15 to 19, right, in terms of the biblical equivalent. Now, I know a lot of metaphysical people don't like the Bible and this, and that, all right? But guess what? Whenever they want to do something to you and try to enact it or whatever, this is what they're using to do it so. So the prophet was all wise and understood that in the formulation and the describing of the Circle 7 Quran, that it needed to have aspects that would relate to it to justify our theocratic autonomy over the land of North, Central, South America, as well as what we call the Mexico, which is therefore a Mexico. And this is the energy that we have to sometimes focus on, because a lot of people who have been coming here, they're throwing a lot of different things into the game to make you always focus on the farthest reaches when Kemet, Mecca, is all within you. All resides within the temple where your moral science resides. Understand? So as we then go further, then that would mean that the original inhabitants were the Kushites. The original inhabitants of the dominion that we now know as Africa after the so-called deluge was Cush. But remember, Cush was the son of Ham. But Cush left Canaan and went over to what is now Africa, or what we now call Africa, right? And basically set up shop there. Why? Well, his father was named Ham. And when you read the story of Ham, you read about Ham and the story of the leprosy, right? So now this is, if we understand leprosy as the depigmentation of the skin, we are then understanding that the leprosy is a form of grafting, or maybe have been a byproduct of the grafting, meaning that maybe Cush left early because he did not want to be a part of what was happening in the Yucatan Peninsula, which eventually led to the destruction of what we now call the Old World, which then led to the whole Noah thing, which then led to the Ham thing. But him having the cursed trait within him, meaning that his descendants would be the ones that would carry on the trait that would eventually lead to the creation of what we call the Neanderthal or the Eurozoid. Can't really call them Caucasians because the original Caucasians were the son of Pooh, Yaqub Cushitus, right? Therefore, when we talk about the original tribe of Shabazz now, which again is another mythic, so-called mythic legendary blacks in history who descended, according to Elijah Muhammad, from the triple stage darkness and existed in there up until the point that the moon was cleaved from the earth. And after the great cataclysm based upon these scientists with these experiments taking shit too far. Therefore, the story is Shabazz basically took his people into Asia and basically had to form them and have them have a harder way of life. Took them into the jungles of Southeast Asia, which is Africa or whatever, and wanted them to live more of a jungle way of life to harden them up, to make them more stern or sensible to the elements and the things that was happening back in these prehistoric or prehistoric times. And so, allegedly, it was 13 tribes of the original Shabazz, and Shabazz was the culmination of 13. And these 13 tribes basically redescended or descended back on the planet, and then after a certain amount of time went into the jungles of Asia, what is now Africa, and then basically created a whole basically new type of race of people, right? These so-called Kushites, and then developed empires and stuff that came from that. If you look at the ancient history of the ancient Kushites, it's going to bring you to the Elamites and all of that. So really, when we're talking about the African peoples of the ancient world or the ancient continent of what we call Africa, we're talking about two, let's say, phenotypically types of Africans. We have the big-nosed, black, dark-skinned, thick, kinky-haired Africans, and then you have the ones that's a little more aquiline, like the Ethiopians, Somalians, a little more aquiline, a little more straighter hair, whatever, that eventually became the Elamites, Persians, Iranians, Kurdish, so forth and so on. Right? And then out of these two groups, then you have the same type of groups in terms of the traditional Moors and eventually the so-called Franciscan Moriscos, right, who were lighter skin and straighter hair, whatever, and started to manifest in the ancient world as well. So as you can see, what we're talking about is the universal migration of people, and due to the intermingling of the different associations within those times and those people, we get a sense of disenfranchising and disenfranchising of their initial, of their initial beginnings. So because we don't read the Bible, you know what I mean, with a concordance or whatever, or because we don't necessarily look at biblical history as an aspect of our own divine history, right? Because a lot of us, when we become metaphysically conscious, we basically get turned off or turn ourselves off from Bible or certain biblical works. We sometimes lose. Mhm. 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 You know what I'm saying? It becomes a problem, and that's the issue. So from the beginning of the story of Yaqub and Esau and all of that stuff that came after that, we wind up in situations where, of course, we're basically turned into servants in our own home. And this is only due to a lack of perspective and the deliberate and falsification of not only world history, but our history and the history of this country for the last 350 years. You know what I'm saying? There would be no United States if it wasn't for the Moroccan Empire. So they tell you that Morocco was the first country in the world to recognize the United States, but because they had geographically flipped the Orient on you and made you believe that North Africa is talking about that place over there in the continent of Africa, they basically making you believe the two is the one instead of the one being the two. And that's the thing. They always want you to get you to look forward, to look ever outward. And this destroys the general perspective that distorts us getting together. So you see the obstacles that exist in the realm of that to do that, because we all are really coming from different nations. Because it was not until verse 6 in that aspect of the Moorish Circle 7 Quran where it says, in later years, many of their brethren from Asia and the Holy Land is joining them. Then it says, the Moabites from the land of Moab, who received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle and inhabit northwest Africa. They were founders and the true possessors of the Al-Moroccan Empire, with their Canaanite, Hittite, and Amorite brethren, who sojourned from the land of Canaan now seeking new homes. Now, again, when we say the land of Egypt, again, we believe we talk about Kemet, right? But there's a place in Brazil called Sergipe del Rey. And Sergipe del Rey means from or coming from or belonging to the king of Egypt, which is very interesting. Big up to Negu with that, which is very interesting because when you start to do the knowledge to that, you start to see that when we talk about ancient Brazil or ancient Rome, being in Brazil and places like that. Okay. And this is what winds up becoming the situation that we start to put together. The fact that a lot of the so-called maps that we are reading, we're basically getting them interpreted to us through Jesuit-trained people. You know what I mean? People who are trained cartographers to basically mess up people's Orient. These people created a Masonic order called the Grand Orient just to disorient people who are not in the order's perception of the world around them. And these are the people who are supposed to be benevolently getting together to promote fellowship and brotherhood throughout the world. How is that the case? So again, Masonry is not an evil thing, right? Because it was something that we created to civilize the Neanderthals, remember? So if that's the case, how can you then use the same thing that you used to civilize the Neanderthals to come and now you basically doing it? This is equivalent to the angels from off high who became so enamored with the daughters of men that they came down and sojourned and entered them, and in the process of that created the so-called Nephilim and the giants and stuff like that that walked in the earth and basically plagued upon man, with people who had to give them sacrifices and all types of shit. This is where this stuff starts. That would be like me creating and sculpting a woman out of rock or marble and shit, and me being so enamored with the sculpture that I want to somehow another drill or cut a hole in the vaginal area so I could somehow have sex with it to try to bring it alive. This is why we were fallen, because we started to lose sight of our noble nature and started to mix our genetics with entities that were created to go about their own understanding of the primordial evolution of a species. This is why they was able to have such a jump start in their genetics. Think about it. How long does it take a mammary species to evolve from one state to the next? You talk about millennia. You talk about millions and millions of years. These people, they're saying the new reports today came out, and today it came out, right? On the eve of their so-called fiscal new year, where they're about to collapse their whole financial system because they don't want to admit the fact that they've been borrowing money from a foreign corporation. And they don't want to bring that up as terms of the American people, because the American people was ready to shoot them based upon this whole gun thing. You understand? So, again, if I can show you a map that basically says Sergipe del Rey was over here, right? Meaning the king of Egypt or belonging to the king of Egypt was over here, it makes sense why they would ask the pharaohs of Egypt to come back here. Because by the time they became Moabs, their genetics had been so altered and changed based upon the breeding with the nations of Cush, breeding with the nations of Ham. You see, those of us that was over here and stayed over here never went through that. You see, this is why you have so much tribal warfare in Africa. You understand? This is why you have so much traditionalism in Africa, that they are really good because it anchors their culture, but it doesn't allow certain people in the culture who are the so-called adepts within the culture that have that so-called factor that allies them, to break the bounds of that sort of tribalism and traditionalism while still maintaining the basic tenets of what the original culture is. They're the ones that's being killed or sacrificed and cut up and shit out there. Do the knowledge. Most of the Roman Catholics in the world is in Africa. You got to do the knowledge. Also, the fact that the United States is using AFRICOM as the staging ground, basically to start their African invasion, because we're still in the same genetic war we've been in. Only difference is now they want to fight the war in Africa because really it's not about the Africans. It's about pushing the Chinese out of Africa, because the Chinese are starting or wanting to re-graft themselves back into the original man-body genetics. Don't believe me? Look at the movie Looper. Look at the money that they're using in the future. It's all Chinese, right? Look at the movie Cloud Atlas. In that movie, there's a future aspect of it where everybody is basically mixed or half Chinese, meaning that everybody's Asiatic. Even the black man, the black Moor that's running the investigation, that's running the resistance, of course, is a black Moor, Keith David, and they straight slanted out his eyes on some Asiatic shit because basically, again, China is trying to reestablish themselves genetically. Because most of their population, believe it or not, a lot of their population, based upon what was happening, what they was doing with the women out there, you had an exorbitant amount of females. You had like a population like 75% males. Not balanced with it had the highest rate of female suicides in the world. They created what they call suicide nets because they would lock the people in China up in factories building these damn iPods for the Americans 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year to get this iPad popping. To the point where people were so crazy with iPad, they was literally jumping out of the window. So they created nets so that way if people try to commit suicide, they would catch their fall. And then when they do it, they beat them and send them back to the floor to do the work. Right? But in Africa, they on some whole other shit. And in that, like I said, anything that the United States is trying to do or will do to perpetuate itself as a world power is going to continue. It's going to continue to do. However, like I said, their debt ceiling has now come in and they're getting messed up. So there's a big thing that's coming down where they're going to have to figure out where the money went, and that's what this whole Libor scandal is about. Everybody that's been pegged to testify in the Libor scandal, Libor, which is LIBOR, which is libel, which is also an acronym for the liability of insurance or whatever. Anyway, everybody that was set to testify in that, this is connected to the $1.2 trillion that's been missing ever since the Clinton era that they've been rewashing over and over again to add to what became the stimulus, which basically led to China calling in a note the day before they killed Michael Jackson and sending the country in a free fall from then, which then led up to them creating the pseudo stimulus to try to bail everybody out. But the money that they was using to bail everybody out with was everybody's own money. So a guy named James Holmes is pegged to create an algorithm basically to track where all of the money went. James Holmes pops. The day he's supposed to testify, that's when James Holmes, the Joker, runs up in and allegedly shoots up the thing, if you believe that was the actual event, right? The day Hillary Clinton is about to testify on the shit, she winds up catching some type of throat cold, and then winds up, when she gets over that, she's supposed to testify again, and then winds up falling down the stairs catching a concussion. Now, you know a concussion damages your memory, right? So, again, right when she got testified. So then the other dude, the dude from Sandy, his father was supposed to testify, who's also a CIA asset. He winds up, his son winds up going postal and winds up shooting up the school and all of that, allegedly, if we believe that happened. There's a website called crisisactors.com. And if you go to that website, you'll see some of the very same actors that you see on these CNN TV shows. Remember, I told you on Super Heru Radio, we announced it first, that the United States, that CNN and Fox took the United States took the government to court to basically fight for the right to be able to print false news stories in perpetuity. And they won the right to lie. They said basically lying and promoting false information is not necessarily fraud because it falls under the First Amendment. You hear what I'm saying? So remember I was talking about the illusion and all of that? This is what this is. So they created a bias in that where they could create false stories. So in that, all of these dudes be in on the act. I knew the fix was in with the Sandy thing when he said that the little kid, one of the little kids that was shot in the thing, created a picture. And one of the kids that survived it created a picture and wanted to give it to the president. As soon as Anderson Vanderbilt, a.k.a. Anderson Cooper, said that, I looked at it, I said, watch it be an owl. And sure enough, it was a green owl, right? Just like Frankenstein, right? Or the Frankenstein was green, right? The Joker had green hair, right? The Sandy monster, the big green monster, right? Like the Grinch and Christmas, it's all the same thing. So that's when I started to see, okay, they already got their Moloch ritual in. We're supposed to believe that they killed these children. Now, I'm not saying that they didn't. I'm not saying they did. I'm saying that they lied so much that you'll never know. We'll never know until you see these kids in a after school special or in a movie or some shit like that. When they flip them back into regular society. So, regards to who and the fact, what that means is that we exist under a so-called government in terms of the so-called United States that no one believes and no one trusts. Yet everybody's still letting it keep going. Why? Why? As many so-called police officers, black officers, white officers, just as many black cops killing black people as white cops are killing black people. Don't get it twisted. This color shit don't have nothing to do because when you join up with them, you turn blue unless you want some spooky sat by the door shit. And most of these brothers today is not that. They don't have the balls for that, man. A lot of niggas don't have the stamina for that. You dig? To be a real deep cover agent on some real positive more, niggas don't really have the balls for that no more. You know what I mean? Because most people, we grew up in the Reagan era. Therefore, we grew up in the era of excess, right? Greed is good, all that crap. So to hide this Libra scandal thing, again, what they keep doing is flipping it. So right when niggas is about to really get it in, they flip it and give you a skull and bonesman, a straight bonesman Secretary of State for a minute while Hitler is on the men. They bring John Kerry in, which then is the Bush influence again, right? So basically, Bush is back in there through Kerry under your man, right? Two bonesmen. Now, one thing they don't talk about, or people haven't talked about, I've seen a lot of lectures on Skull and Bones, but what they don't talk about is the companions that the bonesman gets once he rises out of the coffin after that last masturbation session and mud fight session where he gets anally penetrated by his quote-unquote soulmate. He then sits back in the coffin and then is brought to meet his companions who will follow him and work with him throughout his life. And they are put in terms of symbolic representations or archetypes. The first one is the devil, is the small devil. He represents Lucifer, or the Order of the Trapezoid, or the Church of Satan, or represents the aspect of you that his devilishment is now possessed by this devil that they call the Order, right? Then you got Don Quixote. So these are individuals who are, quote-unquote, the patriarchs in the Order who put on these masks and stand around the coffin right before they basically let you in. And then you get up to meet them. So the first one you meet is the small devil. He represents, again, the demon, the Jesuits, Lucifer, satanic worship, all of that. The Order of Trapezoid, all of that. Then you got Don Quixote. He represents the dirty Moors, the Moriscos, the dirty Moors, the Moriscos, and and the Society of Jesus, as well as the old so-called black nobility from the Yaqub side that helped bleach us all out through the Holy Roman Empire, right? So that's Don Quixote. Then the next one you meet is the Pope. That represents the Jesuits, the Black Pope, the secret heads of most of the so-called Masonic or Freemasonic orders, right? The next one you meet is Uncle Toby. Now, Uncle Toby is the Prince Hall, Boule, house nigga Mason, Uncle Ruckus type that you see in Django played by Sam Jackson, right? That's Uncle Toby, right? Also called Uncle Tom. And then the last one you meet is the Knights. This represents the KKK Knights, the Knights, the Teutonic Knights. It represents the Kaisers, right, as well as the Thule Society, as well as the overall Bonesmen. So Skull and Bones, everybody talks about them as that, but they're just the elite of the quote-unquote elite, the ones that deal with that. You got other ones like Scrolling Key, Wolf's Head, Bazalarus, and other shit. But everybody wants to be a Bonesman. Again, that's because they are basically following themselves after the pattern of the original quote-unquote Moors, which is why they use the Jolly Roger as a symbol, right? But they come in by way of the Nazi Aryan Black Sun thing. So that means all of their affiliations who go through this ritual have these different archetypes that follow them throughout. So like I said, Uncle Toby is like the black traders, the Prince Halls, the police, right? All of that, right? But in that, like it says in the Bible, they fell victim because they kept not their own estate. We started letting other people in because we lost sight of the fact that this was a genetic aspect, a genetic attack, a genetic war to alter what the destiny of the humans was going to be. And we, as the angels or the An-Els, right, the Bays and Els were the ones who descended but did not descend into the physical form of the garden. But then those of us that fell became more physical and then lost sight of our true and noble nature and then switched our nationality or had our nationality in the form of our genetics co-opted. That's why it's so hard for black people to get together today, because you have so much of the ancient genetic war still going on between all of the different ancestry that has never been reconciled in you. Whereas the other races that came out of you didn't have this baggage, because once we gave them the science on how to run into their caste system and then run from there, they then took it all as their own. And then we became the mythic gods in their kingdom, but we had already bounced. So those that descended from us, meaning those of us that interbred with them, became the royalty within their quote race. Think about it. When you read a Quran, right, you don't read from right to left. You read from left to right, right? So now equate that now to civilization. When we was reading left to right, we was in the Islamic state, the perpetual state of Morocco. When we started reading from right to left, we moved out of that state into the Franciscan, quote-unquote, state, meaning the amalgamated Moorish state or Franciscan Moorish state that was now identified with Christianity, not Christ, but Christianity, because the order of Christ is really people with Muslims, is really people by Muslims or Moors. Those people that's really, really in the know, those people who are able to get the permission from the Pope to go see the body of Jesus, as is talked about by Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the Theology of Time. It says that you got to get permission from the Pope, but the thing is, the whole body and all of that is under the jurisdiction of the Moors. So the Moors are protecting the body of Isa. So for the white people, they just like they created the fake Muhammad, they had the fake Jesus, right, and then created the Shroud of Turin to justify its existence, and then perpetuated that as if that was the same as Isa or Yehoshua or Emmanuel. When all Isa really really did was demonstrate to Rome of the day that he was a free national and that he was not under jurisdiction, right, of those worldly powers in the form of Rome. Gets deeper. James Holmes, if you notice, he had reddish-orange hair. He represented the Red Kachina, right? Because this was also a ritual to Kukulkan. Kukulkan. K-U-L-K-A-N. Again, KKK. For those people that listened to the last show, that was a deity that developed out of the so-called Toltec Empire that was a replacement or a pseudo-empire of people who was looking to incarnate some of these lower deities and allow them to inhabit the bodies of the so-called Neanderthals and the Caucasians as a means of expression on the third density. And so they brought their god, Quetzalcoatl, and basically tried to force that god on the Mayans, right? Now, we know the Mayas are the Moors of the Almoravian Empire, right? But we also know them as the Olmecs or the Tomoancan. So these people, Toltecs, basically tried to force this god on them. So to capitulate or to create the peace, they adopted an aspect of it and made that in their own image, meaning they made the god look like them in order for the people to be comfortable enough to deal with it after the war. The same thing that happened in Africa with the war of the North and South, the quote-unquote Kemet, in terms of them adopting Ra over Amen, even though the worshippers of Amen defeated the worshippers of Ra. They still honored the god by putting Ra first, you see? And that allows the people to accept the god. So it's the same thing with that in the context that they accepted Kukulkan, but see, Kukulkan was, again, this is in the Yucatan Peninsula, right, when this whole thing was going down in terms of the grafting process. And so now, non-malefic, higher dimensional entities, but lower moral fiber started to be allowed to incarnate into these lower beasts. and cause more trouble amongst the original people. So this really was the first manifestation of what we would call the KKK on the planet. You know what I'm saying? In the form now, in the modern form, because we're talking about 900 BC, and this goes down. Excuse me. Actually, I think it's like 900 AD when this is going down. So as you can see, we can chart without a doubt how these things started to go down if we don't use their chronological or their so-called interpretation of our history and our authority of what happened to us. You get jammed up with this research shit when you're trying to justify stuff that you see these modern anthropologists do, and all of that stuff is Hegelian dialectic as well as eugenicist, Stool and Hobbes, Nietzsche, you know what I mean, Darwinism, all this shit rolled up in one. It has nothing to do with what your real history is, because all of those guys are part of an order that agreed to keep that secret from you and alter the time stream and history around you so that way you never get back to that. So how could somebody like that ever really be your friend, whether they black or white or Asian or Indian or Native American or whatever? Because they're not in the same boat as you, because they don't descend from these Asiatic people that everybody been trying to feed on all of these thousands of years, millions of years. But somehow, if I say that I'm Asiatic and not African, it's like I'm automatically, segmenting myself from different people? I'm not doing that, because I don't treat nobody different, see? Because as a civilized being, you're supposed to uplift all of humanity. Therefore, you can't uplift somebody if you're in the same dirt with them. How you going to clean them up if you just as dirty or more dirty? It's not going to happen. So then what is, we already know, okay, what African culture is, then what is Asiatic culture? What is that? That's your race, then what is that culture? Where are the Asiatic ruins in the world? It's in everything else. It's just under different names. See, the early Christians, when they was going through it, you had different sects that was vying for different aspects of what the dominant aspect of Christianity was going to be. So you had the agnostics, you had the Carpocratians, you had the Essenes, you had the Coptics, you had the Axumites, you had the Donatists. All of these people made up the First Ementio Council under Militati, but everybody gives respect to Constantine as the first emperor, right, of Rome in that sense, or the first modern emperor of Rome. Some people even say the first pope, modern pope of the so-called amalgamated church now. But I would say the founder of the church is Peter, the same black Peter that you see standing next to Santa Claus, the pope, during Christmas. The same quote-unquote Peter that brought them over here in the first place and gave them the gift, right, of the so-called New World. This is the founder, this is the archetypical founder of the so-called church. And when you go to St. Peter's Basilica, you see a big black giant statue of him sitting in his golden throne altar, right, with the aten around him, and he's jet black. Matter of fact, most of the major icons that they were built from the time is all black. The white ones you see come from the later period. That's why a lot of these guys, Picasso and Manet and Matisse and these people, all of these people were Freemasons. And a lot of these people received commendations and was able to get their own work popping, because a lot of them, when they started to get on, like people don't know, Picasso is the one that created the image of the dove with the leaf in the mouth for the symbol of peace, as well as the symbol of the old Communist Party in Italy. You know, he was also a Taurus, meaning a bull. You know what I mean? And as a Jesuit knight, he had to follow these paper bulls. So one of these paper bulls was that all Moorish architecture and all Moorish feats of great intellect, prowess, art, and humanity were to be rewritten and redrawn and put in the image, you know what I'm saying, of the conqueror, which was them. And a lot of these dudes, this was what early Renaissance paintings and all of that stuff was really about. They want you to believe that Juan de Pareja was the slave that studied under his master, the so-called Franciscan painter. I forget his name. See, I remember the black dude and not the white dude. But anyway, Juan de Pareja was the one that taught all of them how to paint. But not all Moriscos was down with the amalgamated empire and all of that. But you better believe that if Isabella and Ferdinand was sending Colombo and Colon over here to get this money, you better believe that they was breaking the De Medicis off with that. And this is why we can't really mess with the title Dey, because the Deys, again, were the antithesis of the Deys. The Deys came out of the Mamluk Empire that was given limited autonomy because they were these white Christian slaves that were put through the Janissary system and then brought up in the process of killing other white people and quote-unquote white Christians that did not accept Islam. That's why they said that you would pray for a good day or have a good day, you see, because the Deys did that. So when we talk about Judgment Day, we're talking about the grand judgment of the Deys, right? That's why you got Evelyn Day Rothschild. That's why you got Norman Day Rockefeller. That's why you got, you see what I'm saying? D. Rockefeller. It's always Days. They represent, again, the Neanderthal that was raised up through Islam, the sword of Islam, the sword of Osman Ali Bey, or Osman Bey, and brought into what they call the human family, which were all of the races that came out of the 13 original tribes that originally came out of the triple stage darkness and survived the great cataclysms and all of that, and were now being used as a genetic stock to help promote and bring about these new people. These beings that were to be called human, based upon this sector of the galaxy, or this planet specifically, being put in a certain sphere that unbound creation could manifest. So instead of an ordered chaos, we have a chaos that comes into order. It's the only place in the universe that do that, or is alleged to do that. So when we talk about the synoptic gospels, these are all of the things that were agreed upon that became part of what we call the Bible. That's why we can look at it as so many different things, and why greats like C. Freeman L. was so into breaking it down and using it as a means to defend one's own liberty through the theocratic autocracy that we manifest through it as the original founders and licensors of it. Because we basically licensed it to the Catholic Church that then licensed it out to the people, to the Slavs that became Christians and then known as Christian slaves. Get the book, Muslim Masters, Christian Slaves. See what I'm talking about. So all of these agnostics, Carpocratians, and Coptics, Axumites, Donatists, all of these were followers and had different aspects of what they call the Nag Hammadi text. But now look at that. Naga, right? Ham, Mahdi, right? Three aspects of religious context. Nah, I just finished. From the specific context of who brought this context of how many generations were manifesting out of these three aspects. You got the Naga, right, which is the Naga people, the Southeast Asian, Sambo-Judasian people. Then you got the Hamites, right, which are the mixed people and all of that. Then you got the Mahdi. This represents the Islamic aspects of that. The Islamic being Islam, as well as, well, first of all, being self-law and master, and then being Islam, the so-called religion that was then given to the Philistine aspect of the human race. You know what I'm saying? So this is what becomes the summation of our position now. Because as the forebearers of the people that allowed the experiment to happen, we are now in a place where we're supposed to receive everything back in spades. And nobody wants to give up their seat to facilitate that. Yeah, man. Yeah. It's hard for me to do that when you're doing it. Okay. So, from all of that, these three lines, we get the lines that we found today fighting and at war with themselves in the so-called Middle East and Asia. Well, the Asian aspect of the campaign started in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s with the Vietnam shit. Now we're in the we're coming out of the Arabic section of this. Now they're trying to turn this into an African situation. We've been reporting for about a year and a half about the incursions that they was making into Nigeria, and the CIA pogroms is trying to flip against the people and create this whole religious Christian versus Muslim thing, when really it's whole, again, African versus African. But due to a lot of, like I said, the Roman Catholic stuff, a lot of those so-called Africans are possessed, you understand? And due to all the sick humanitarian aid that's going with these white people over here in terms from the Hollywood, remember, these are actors. These are people who play roles. And I'm to believe that these people who make movies where they call niggas niggas and kill niggas and shoot niggas in the face and all that, I'm supposed to believe that they're somehow helping me or my race, quote unquote, by adopting all of these people and children and whatnot, and going over there and giving people water who was pulling water out the ground in 1 million BC. You know what I'm saying? With diamonds and stuff. You dig what I'm saying? Like scientific people. You giving scientific people mean to what? What happened? The successive years of deterioration of the African genome has led to the perpetuation of devil inhabitation of the people. And they then start living out the ways of the conqueror. And you always know when it happens. There's a coup. Then after the coup, the government solidifies itself. The government that's coming in becomes more restrictive than the one that they kicked out. They start killing at least 50,000 to 75,000 people within the first, let's say, 5 to 10 years of that regime. And then the next aspect, they coast because now the United States can get in there and get money. And then they start to topple the regime when they want to invade the neighboring country. Remember, the country they invade is never the country that they want to invade. That's just the beachhead that they use to get in the other side. So, if Israel is at war with Palestine, why are they bombing Sudan? You see? If the United States was in Vietnam to stop the incursions of the North Vietnamese into South Vietnam, then why was they in Cambodia and Laos blowing up all of the bombs there, blowing up all of the individual original people there? Again, the Naga aspect of the Nag Hammadi text, which represent all of the peoples of the book, meaning all of the peoples who were reminiscent or descendant from the great mixture of the genetics that began during the process that led to the cleaving of the continents, the splitting of the moon, and everything else. The so-called mythic history of the ancient Asiatic race of angels that descended into the bodies and of men incarnated into the souls and bodies of men based upon them coming down and mating with the daughters. You see? This is why they have a order called the Daughters of the American Revolution. You see? Because that's the gateway that they use to come in. These relationships, all again based upon these mystery religions that was passed down by all these people and then finally locked up and kept secret in places like the Vatican, places like that, but then led to the creation of the natural antithesis of that, which is us. Reawakening as the remnants of this people who are now starting to re-achieve this glory. And so the mythic history of the Confederacy and all of that went down, where we always see the white people be the ones fighting and all of that, but then every so often we see pictures of black Confederates and we hear stories of free black people in the Confederacy and things like that. But then the deeper you dig, you start to find out that all of these Southern gentlemen and these planters and all these people is black men, some of whom were in league with these other Holy Roman emperors or so-called Spanish now or Franciscan or Gallic people that was coming over here with their perigenous albinous Gauls, meaning they white slaves, who they had a tendency of breeding in such a manner with them to be able to raise them up, to be able to represent them in matters of commerce and business with other Moors that traditionally would either take their heads off at first sight or immediately enslave them unless they renounced Christianity and accepted Islam. Because we're dealing with these things as theocratic institutions that are somewhat at the period we're talking about used as political organizations. You know what I'm saying? It said that St. Peter wanted to be buried upside down. Wanted to be crucified upside down because he wasn't worthy to be crucified the same way Christ was. This is the beginning of the upside down cross being used as what they call the cross of the world or the so-called cross of Satan that you see people like Lil Wayne and the rest of these niggas wearing. You know what I'm saying? Now, this don't mean that they are Satanists, but it does mean that they loan their images to be portals for the satanic agenda. Yet, at the same time, we all do, if we're wearing any clothes or anything or using anything that's made off the labor and sweat and tears and blood and sacrifice of children or families that were forced into matters of production. You see, this is why the Bible said we all born in sin. We all born under the moon. We all born in the dark. So the aspect of moral science that most people deny is the very aspect that makes it fluent and work. And so right when we need certain luminaries in our society to help us do shit, you see them going. Like since the 2012, there was a lot of great people who passed, man. Stokely, Carmichael, Steve Coakley, again, Prince Uriel. Myra died before then. Ashira L, blessed to death. But quietly, you know what I mean? People just going. And because there's so much confusion and so much like chatter and hatred going on amongst the people who's supposed to be shedding the light with the people are not paying attention that these things may be by design. So you got to understand, you come from a people who think on the concept of billions of years ahead. They weigh matters of the moment on billions of years of history. That's how we used to do it. That's why we had things like astrology and things like that to make it easier, to narrow down and build. But the overall process and the overall progress is the same. So in this time of new history, in this first 25,000 years, when they talk about these 3 days of darkness, again, a day to man is 24 hours, but a day to God is whatever God perceives it as. You see? Talking about billions, quadrillions, trillions of years, so fathomable that you can't even get into that. Yet We are surrounded by subordinate deities who choose not to represent and see that. Therefore, they cannot see us in our true capacity, you understand? And because we haven't raised, well, not us, but a lot of people of our so-called species have not raised themselves up genetically, a lot of them have put themselves in genetic blocks based upon consciousness and race. And these are the things that create the different schisms in the community that keep us from moving together. Whereas these other races or these other people are moving more in harmony or in that for lack of what we are not giving. So when it says that he came and gave his only begotten son to the whole world so that the whole world could cease and be saved, this was basically the science of the descendants of Esau giving up their birthright and nationality for everybody else in the world to have things called countries and flags and stuff like that, who had never had that. You understand? So when we talk about the tribe of Ben Ishmael and the Manasseh tribes of all of that, or the ancient Canaanites, we talking about us here. We talking about here. And because of that, we are given an impossible mission to fulfill. This is where, again, Mission Impossible and all this stuff comes from. The idea of them always having to do something to destroy the natural progression of another country. So what you think they're going to do if they was able to go to different planets? What you think they would do then? They would do the same thing to any alien race they encountered. They would try to take over their shit too. Because the ultimate destiny for them is destruction. You understand? Utter annihilation. Not because I hate white people or black people who act white or whatever, but because that is the final result of excess. You understand? You only can get but so fat before you die. You know what I'm saying? You can only do but so much horrible shit before somebody does something about it. That's why they want to get the gun thing. Do you realize that this man has signed over 139 executive orders? You know how many? That's more than anybody else that's been in the game. So you know, niggas, nobody do it better than niggas. But again, you're talking about an African American. This is an African American, though. Again, an American that's made to believe that he made to believe that his father is this guy Barack Obama, when we know and he know that this father is this dude Frank Marshall Davis, who may or may not be the alleged real father of Jay-Z, which explains their whole relationship. Why not? And the connection to the Rockefeller, because Davis was a Rockefeller. Why not? They make movies about that shit all the time, book bestsellers and all of that. This is how they maintain their position, and this is how they're supposed to do. That's the other side of the game we got to get straight in our minds and in our reality. They doing what they supposed to do with this crap. They are creating that. Hey, how are you? All right. They are creating that. Yeah. They are creating the aspect where they are continuously moving in one direction and enforcing everybody else to move the same way. All right. Okay. So in that, they've become a system of perpetual deniability. And this deniability has led to them being able to create false realities and false nationalities for people to die for, more so than their own original one. Did you know that between the late 1950s and the early 1960s, I believe, there was something called the Federation of the Caribbean, where all of the Caribbean islands were basically gonna shove off the rule of the British Crown and all unify as one kingdom, basically, or as one basic nation with different states, basically like the United States of the Caribbean. But this was torpedoed and shot down by the CIA and these different people who send different agents in there and black people in there to work against the progress. And this is always the state that we in. 90% of police work come from informants, man. Don't let these niggas fool you. You know how many people, but they only choose which informants they want to admit into evidence. You know how many people came up and came forth and gave pictures and showed who shot Tupac and Biggie and all that? The coroner's report, when you read it, says that the shot that killed Biggie actually came from the other side of the car. And the shots in the other car weren't the ones that killed him. It was the one that came from the driver's side. What's up with that? You know what I'm saying? So in that, just like I said, Lincoln gave 3 proclamations, right? The 13th Amendment with the 2 sections, which is the fraud, you know what I mean? And the temples that were following that aspect of it got caught up in the 501c3 shit. Whereas the revised statutes of the original, what they call Heard Smith, was able to solidify the base of who and what we would be in perpetuity. Yet, a lot of us have not mastered that aspect of what's going on. So they get caught up in the rhetoric aspect of what Moor science has become, which is really the derelict aspect of it and the part that doesn't represent actual movement as an envoy towards the goal of uplift and fallen humanity. But to do that, you have to first understand yourself as an Asiatic. So because we live in this juxtaposed position of polarity, even amongst our own people, the minute you say something like that, it's automatically like you are somehow negating or trying to defecate on people who are associating with African or black. Doesn't mean that. It just means that as an Asiatic, I understand the context in which and how to use a lot of that stuff and be able to navigate in a way that allows me to fulfill my obligation as an L or a B. But because they have created a society called the Canaanites based upon eugenics, anthropology, and the need to conceal the true history of our people, they want to make it seem like the Canaanites worshiped a god called Baal, B-A-L, B-A-A-L. When Baal is Baal, so that means then that the Canaanites who were the idol worshippers worship Baal, and they also worship Baal, and they also worship this and worship that. But the people who are telling you this have only been 10,000 years out of a cave. You got to understand what's going on. They're trying to catch up with you and then color some of your ancestors in their light to be that. And they got to that position by allowing themselves to be used by these so-called black people who were there to want to push you out of position based upon the fact that you were one of the descendants of Cush or something who bounced from over here and went over there and then came back as a Moab, you know, or never left over here, you see what I'm saying, and became an Alcompton. So we never left the state of Morocco because the state of Morocco is perpetual based upon my state of mind being in the perpetual state of Morocco, which equivocates to me the state of God's kingdom. Because I was the L, or descendant of the L, that was manifested now in the form of L, right, or Moor, who is now brought a divine message, which is the good news, which is that the kingdom of God is at hand. You know what I'm saying? But because I live in a reality now where when I say God, people's like, oh, well, you're still using the ancient German form that comes from gut and thought, and then that God basically brings you under jurisdiction of the, you see what I'm saying? All of that is irrelevant because as an Asiatic, you automatically know that I know what that is. So if I'm using it as a colloquialism that is basically used by what they call the vulgar masses so everybody can associate the idea that I'm trying to present through the illustration of the verbal contract or the verbal communication that is being exhibited. But because, again, people are using this knowledge in a form of ego masturbation, they have created pseudo-cults for themselves, you understand? And these cults then now become the progenitors of the ideas. And then the cult leader becomes the figurehead of it. But you cannot remake the wheel. You're going to remake something that the man already put down, man. The reason why people like York and people like the people who came later was because people like Noble Drew Ali and Marcus Garvey worked together. They wasn't caught up in Garvey calling himself a Negro or using the word Negro or black, and then him basically saying that Negro and black is not really what you're using. They was doing what they were supposed to do. They was giving you both sides of the argument, but at the same time showing you that they still working together. Because when you see Marcus Garvey, he wasn't just like no Negro. He was just like a Moor, because he was a Moor. When you look at the Black Star Line certificate that he first signed, he used his stamp on it. He used the 5-cent stamp on it, on his signature. In the 20s, G. So I'm supposed to believe that all black people in the South are being raped and killed when all I'm seeing is ancient pictures of thousands upon thousands of black people in National Guard working together? Where's that black history? Where's the shit with that shit? I don't see no movies like that, because that was sanctioned by the descendants of the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance, which is based on the Morisco or Franciscan Renaissance of the whitewashing of original people history. So over on Black Wall Street, we dealing with nationality and all this other shit. Over on Harlem Renaissance, they're dealing with speculation and philosophy and all this other shit that has nothing to do with getting us out the world context that we have been put out of at that time for about 150 to 175 years. See what I'm saying? True American with a capital C is what you represent. You dig what I mean? And a true American is basically what they refer to as American Indian. And an American Indian, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is also called a nigger. So what does that say about everything? So the debate, in retrospect, is really over. There is really no debate on who and what you are unless you enter into the debate to say who and what you are. And if you entering into that debate with somebody that's not dealing with, again, nationality or independence, freedom, liberty, you know what I'm saying, birthright, inheritance, then they are your sworn enemy, because they are not trying to get you put back in a position that we put them in. Like in coming to America and trading places, the so-called ignorant nigga, Eddie Murphy, basically works with the other slave, the other white man, Dan Aykroyd, to put the two bleached out Holy Roman emperors, the dukes, out of business. Then in coming to America, the prince, the African prince, comes to America and they gives them back money to help them start up when they now bums and destitute, based upon the disrespect that they gave to the Moor by putting him and treating him like a monk, you see? So again, you cannot change what your ancestors are. You are what you are by design. It makes no difference if I don't want to be noble. That's what my ancestors was. So if you say then that you are an African American, you are saying within the last 50 years of your life, you had an ancestor from the continent of Africa. If that's not true, and again, I'm just using the Oxford definition. If that's not true, then you're using the opposite. You know what I'm saying? And that means that you can't claim that. You see? So this does not mean that you don't see yourself as a so-called black person. I just don't see myself as a black person like that in terms of what these black people have turned it into. Because those of our race, when they get in positions of power, don't claim us. So again, we are stateless amongst our own people. So why would an actual fictitious state that actually has a fictitious state for itself allow us to partake in that fully? You can't, because they know that our ancestors created that for them to rock for a certain time. And so they looked at it like we started to infringe on their work. And so it became an issue of sustainment. How are we going to support the ones that supported us without telling them that they did that? And every white man and every white woman are playing that game now, whether they know it or not, man. Sorry. That's why in getting this deep with it, you get rid of the hate, man. You get rid of the anger, the rage that turns you to the dark side. You know what I'm saying? It takes you from Anakin to Darth Vader. This is what they want, to serve the emperor. Who's the emperor to them? A emperor is, what's his name? The Pope, right? And then the black Pope under him, that's their emperor. Their queen is Elizabeth. My emperor, the last one I remember before Montezuma really, was Ali. And I can say that because everybody else that then came after him has interpreted what he did and has used aspects of what he did to either make them they shit look better or make more of a shit or whatever seem worse. But again, I look at what the man did based upon the research, extensive research that I have done and that I have felt and I have spiritually went into to really get to the bottom of. And it seems to me that they don't really want you to do the knowledge to that. Rastas get a certain rock because their emperor is Selassie. But then when you get into the emperorship of Selassie, you get into the royalty of Russia, believe it or not. Through Abraham Petrovich, Ganable. Ask a Russian what a Caucasian is. He ain't going to tell you a white person. He's going to tell you it's a black person from Asia. That's why they hate the communists, because they also worship the Black Madonna, or did up until gay-ass Lenin came in, and then Stalin came in, because both of them was molested by Blavatsky, who was the slave of Randolph, who was one of the ascended masters that helped school Jew Ali. When they say that the prophet was divinely prepared, it means just that. He was prepared in a divine manner, the same manner that you read about in the book The Alchemist. That's how the divine master is prepared from a child to be the Buddha, to be the golden child. Because you have Moors that were in positions all over the world to show you how the world runs and what the breadth of the empire was, what it meant physically, spiritually, and symbolically. The Temple of Solomon is you. These niggas got to go and create rituals and actually build physical things that resemble what you are on a genetic level. But you worship them? Only in the fiction can something like that exist. Only in a colorable state can something like that exist. Only with someone who is colored in or someone who is cut out of something, hued man, can something like that work on. So the transhumanist element in all of this is to effeminate the black man so much that the black woman no longer wishes to procreate with him. And in that, to deal with it, she has to degenerate her own pineal organ to capitulate to Caucasian, or what we would say Eurozoid penetration would be. Meaning that she needs to bleach herself, do things that put her in this position. We live in a world where the beys once ruled the world. Now the Bays, or the Bays who once ruled the world, worship Bay once, or Bay Onse, who knows less, right? Knows, right? This is a travesty, yet this is what it's like to live as a human. You dig what I'm saying? But if that's not your original genetics, if your genetics were Merkabic, Moorish, right, then you have the ability to transcend into a light being and beam out of here. In accepting Jesus Christ, you see, as your Lord and Savior, or Yahushua, right, or the body of Christ, the body politic of those with the Christ consciousness who, even though were forced into the experiment, held fast and did not eat of the foreign fruit, meaning did not do that or went back to their noble nature in declaring themselves different or opposite, you see, than the other nation. Whenever you read the Bible, it's all about nation and kings and princes. Look in the Bible for the word human, right? As that Bible went through all of the different translations, based upon that, you had the different versions that correspond to it. So the holy war, or the jihad is Islamic, where the crusade is Christian. Because the jihad, which is the holy war, is the war against Satan. The crusade is the war for freedom, right? And liberty. That's how they did it. So Hugh de Payon, meaning Hugh of the pagans, the founder of the Templars, him and Jacques de Molay and them, those were all Gallic princes, meaning Franciscan Moorish princes descended from Charlemagne and all of that, that wanted to go to Jerusalem and hold down and practice Moorish science in secret. But due to the obligation to the so-called popes, or the warrior popes, they were forbidden to interface with the Muslims like that unless it was for a crusade, meaning to people it with slaves and turn the old world, or let's say, into like a factory to help, again, increase the genetics of the inferior races by bonding them with original people. So you have the Septuagint, which is the oldest Hebrew Bible going to 200 BC. Then you got the Ptolemaic second aspect of it, which translates into the Greek, the Etruscan, which is Greek, and Phoenician, which is Canaanite, as well as then the Hebrew sages that come from the 12 tribes or whatever that descend from this thing. That's why they had to keep the commandment. That's why they diet and all of that was a certain way, because you had to eat a certain way to produce the genetics to be able to inhabit or be inhabited by whatever they wanted to procure through you. Because the humans, again, were the species that were to be made from the ground, man into mankind, that would then turn into that. But then because we broke the commandment by dealing with them and trying to raise them up, it became a wash. So, again, you got the Dead Sea Scrolls. You got, what's interesting with the Hebrew sages, they said there were 72 of them. There's that number, again, going back to the 72 conspirators that sit in judgment in the hieroglyph of Aseer, who is also Hiram, who is also the original man. The original O, Asiatic, A, Black, B, Man, M. Switch that up, that's Moab, which again is Moab, which again is the science in which shows you that these men were dealing with a certain frequency rhythm that was accentuated to an Asiatic sphere that would allow you to go into certain aspects of knowledge that if put through in other religious fashion, you would not. And this knowledge, by way, bring you back to the seat of the empire. Reestablished in our modern time through what the Prophet did and what the great men alongside him brought about, great men and women aside him brought about. So just as they talk of Mary, there's another saint that is from a damn book in the Bible called Thecla. And Thecla was a woman who existed at a time when they was trying to force women to marry certain people. And so she didn't want to do it because she was following Peter. No, excuse me, she was following Paul. The story is the rich dude went to the town and told the mayor, and they tried to burn her at the stake. And the story is that she prayed, and then there was a big storm, and she was saved. She bounced. So then the same thing happened again when she went to Rome or something like that, and they wound up trying to feed her to the lions, like Daniel. And this time, the female lions came out. Now, peep that. The female lions came out and stopped all the other lions from trying to hurt her. Then she was able to escape again. Then the third time it happened, the mother dude tried to force himself on her, and she then was supposed to be thrown off a mountain or something. And in the process of that, when they threw her off, it turned out that there was a marsh there, but under the marsh there was like a lake, a pool. She was able to swim away. So this is basically an allegory, or Thecla became a symbol of the Asiatic woman's perseverance, because she was a Moabite woman, Asiatic perseverance to maintain her chastity, you see. Whereas Mary can be switched with Magdalene to try to make the whole thing seem cool. So Thecla, then, who is Sekhmet, you see, in his book had to be taken out because this showed the prophet can manifest as a woman. And they don't want that. You see what I'm saying? Especially a lot of these men in these different black conscious movements, because a lot of them, again, are bound in strictly male brotherhood that do not have the feminine principle in that, because they are trying to manifest that principle as a man, and that don't work. Oh, I'm sorry. It wasn't that she drowned. They tried to throw her in a pool of sharks. And when they threw her in the pool of sharks, before she died, she chose to baptize herself. And in the process, the sharks basically circled around her like a halo as she baptized herself in that. So again, she nationalized herself before death, you see, which then gave her life, which meant the sharks had to look out for her and act as a halo, because they get put in a proper position when you get put in your proper person. In our time, the sharks represent lawyers, you see. So again, these are different theocratic examples of more science put in a form that was extricated out of the traditional canon of books, because it would have given women, right, Moorish women, the ability to demonstrate on the aspects of them being goddesses or continuous of Christ's church. Because that's what happened with the Merovingian line, when the Merovingian line married into the Dugdamaldi or Washita Empire. But in that, at the same time, it then put the Dugdamaldia in league subjectship of the French Dauphin, who was under the jurisdiction of Napoleon, which then took them out of autochthon status to indigenous or native status, you see? And then from that to Negro, or worse, African American status. which all still has to be corrected. See? So, like I said, this aspect of it comes in the form of these biblical references that, again, are really binding spells for these entities that seek to use it as a mask for their deeds. But when you actually invoke it, it becomes different. It becomes something that they cannot really deal with. This is the parable, they say, of the reed and the weed, of the twins becoming one. This is the aspect of the two DNA or the two genetics of man and human trying to merge into becoming a different form of Asiatic. Right? Let both grow together until harvest, and I will put enmity between thee and thy woman, and between thy seed and her seed. That's Genesis 3:15. The sycamores are cut down, right? But we will change them into cedars. You see? This is an aspect of what I'm talking about, of denationalization, that eventually leads to alien abduction, or what we call demonic possession, based upon you identifying with a nation that genetically you are opposed to. That's why people grow cancers and things like that in cities and societies that they're not really meant to be in. Because genetically, you are not meant to be amongst those, what they call the vulgar masses, the people who subsist on everybody and not look out for everybody. Anybody that's like that is horrible. You see what I'm saying? So again, the sycamores are cut down, the moors, right? But we will change them into the cedars. This goes from one side of the national side into the naturalized side. But again, these are verses that you can use to show and prove why you have the right to do and say what you are meant to say and do if properly applied, based upon an aspect of that. This is almost the ultimate militancy, because this is going before people without a gun and without certain things demanding shit, but standing on the square on right without being attached to any of that shit, without taking oaths to uphold any of that shit is secret, and stand on the square for what the man and what the ancestors left down for us to fulfill. Instead of dying for the revolution, living for it. Living for it to the point that you actually see it manifest. It's not in your life, in the life of the community that you build around you that identify with that. Regardless of what you want to believe when it comes to your free nationality and your actual substance as a being that was always here. And when I say here, I mean North Central South America. Like I said earlier, there was a federation of the Caribbean at one time that they was trying to pop off. And they had a flag. But essentially, like I said, when you look at what went down, like with that whole Sandy thing, and I talk about the Thekla versus the Mary thing, the Thekla thing, the Thekla aspect of their ritual was manifested when you had that woman, Indian woman, again, who sacrificed herself based upon whatever triggering programming that some dude named Michael, again, the Archangel Michael, and another chick named Dawn, again, the Golden Dawn, called in the radio show. It triggered her to basically shoot herself based upon them doing a ritual with this chick trying to have twins. It just so happens that they had something called the Grail launch. Grail standing for gravity, rotational, aerial, vector, something ITY thing, where they took two probes and crashed them into the moon. You know what I mean? Again, there's that two with that two twin thing. So she was admitted to the hospital for all of that, for morning sickness. I've had 3 babies in my short years on this planet, and none of the women I had them with ever had morning sickness so bad to the point where they was going to the hospital. So, but this is the new shit. So I'm seeing this as a pattern going on with all these babies that's being born around the same time, because these are the sacrificial lambs that are born around the time if they want to do some sort of satanic ritual that they pick from, you see. So you got the 2 probes crashing into the moon. You got the this chick having the two twins. You got the black hole galactic alignment that went down on the 21st, right? Where you had the two Hadron Collider being turned on, and you had them doing the grand ritual at Chichen Itza with the ancient form of the Hadron Collider at the same time, trying to pop off two black holes, right? And then in the middle of that, you got this Indian woman who basically kind of sets it off. Actually, Rahana sets it off with her doing the 777 tour, where she got the press to go on the jet, the plane, manifesting the air, manifesting the harlot of Babylon in the air, right? And you got the aspect of what happened in India after they had the funeral for the first woman who got killed, with the Indian woman who got raped on the bus. That's the Thekla aspect. The Magdalene aspect of it. One was a nurse, one was treated like a whore, you see. But both were Indian, right? Meaning East Indian, meaning Hindu, right? Meaning Aryan, right? And again, there's that number 2 again. Number 2 is also a code for feces, right? Of which then you bring in the dung beetle, which is death and resurrection, in the form of these so-called children that were put into the sacrifice to Moloch, manifested in the green picture of the owl that Anderson Cooper held up to everybody and allegedly said that they're going to put that in the White House or whatever. So, green is also the color of gold. It's also the color of, again, Frankenstorm. On the same day, they had a shooting. That went down. They had a shooting in the Excalibur Hotel, right? There's Lancelot, right? King Arthur, Lancelot. Then the guy's name was Adam Lanza, right? Adam Lancelot, right? It's all trying to self-perpetuate this new cycle of tetrahedral redundancies that become quantum entanglements that lead to quantum fissures, see, that they're thereby lead into splintered realities that they can somehow bind together in some sort of grand ritual that they'll call, let's say, the end of days. But the end of the day, or the end of days, meaning the end of those days, those worshippers of the light, those aspects of the Yakubian experiment, the 13th tribe, the Khazars, the Kazbars, the Khazars, you see, the Zars, right? This aspect that in our context became known as communism gets reduced into what we refer to as communism. But these are all old Moorish black nobility families that bleached themselves out and eventually tried to break away from the Holy Roman Empire and then tried to reestablish themselves over here, but we had already been deposed and absorbed into the so-called United States we went from Americans into being citizens of the United States. See, we live in America, which is the state. You see, we live in the state of America. Well, you are the state, or American is your state. America is the state in which you reside, the universal state, right? Or the state of mind of an American. You don't have the state of mind of a Chinese person, even though aspects of your American culture has that in it based upon the ancient antecedents of the Z or the Zhao Empire and the Olmecan Empire before it became Moorish or Mayan. So this bookend of ritual where they kill this Indian woman or have her kill herself and then have this other Indian woman gang raped to death by these Indian men on the bus, see, in the transit, transmitting utility. This is creating it's like you take a pin and put it on a pin board, and then you take a string and take it all the way across the other board, then you tie a string around it. And that string between those 2 points represents the flow line now that you or they are going to try to emanate and move things into a spherical direction. Wow, it's funny. And that becomes a system of great a system by which people become known or know how to function, you see? And so whatever disaster or whatever new thing they want to try to polarize and get people into, this is all now polarized now by them allegedly going off the so-called cliff, which basically means that they can't write any new checks. They got to basically deal with all of the stuff they got. What they could do is try to make a side deal. He can let it go down and then come in with an executive order like they always do and just try to extend more time. But all it is doing is buying more time. But the more time that they're buying is really the time that they're supposed to be buying to get the American people in play to take over the government. That's what this whole thing was about. Teaching them so well that they will be able to re-instruct everybody on how to do it. That's why they teach everybody in the world how to fight. But in that, they're teaching everybody in the world how to fight like them. This was a process enacted by LBJ after Vietnam on the advising of, McNamara before he bounced out of the whole situation, out of utter disgust, because the whole thing was, again, something that was brought on to depopulate everyone, but also as a control experiment in what they call Phoenix programs that would eventually go into what we see as the school shootings today. It's all there. Everybody knows. You see? Everybody knows. Yet nobody is going to really, what can people really do? What people can really do is declare who and what they are within that. So God forbid, whatever happens, at least you go down within the history and the heavens that you were not a part of it, and that you dealt with things as best as you could based upon your noble nature and what your ancestors set you here to do. Therefore, as the Els, or the Elohim, the descendants of Yehoshua in the genealogy of Esau and all the other stuff, that goes beyond any individual leader or any individual sect that came out of what any of these people actually did, because all of them were really a part of one place. And according to what most of these people believe, if they believe what they Bible say, then that means that they know that their ancestors came from over here and then went over there. So that means they descend from us. That means you can't be an African at the same time. So that has become by which people have now identified themselves. So whatever you claim is what you are. So you want to claim something that is so universal and ancient that it occupies a sphere that you can exist as an archetype in now. And that can only be the image of which and by you were created in the form of Allah, or the mother, who then became the father, who then became a mother, not in an androgynous sense, but in a archetypical gender sense. You are able to manifest all based upon the descendants of that fact. So, anybody that wants to holler at me about subjects such as this, for lecture or book signings or anything like that, holler at me at houseofel@hotmail.com, as well as you can check out www.feartheduplicates.com, as well as www.cookingmorewithless.com, as well as www.sagaasad.com. Big up to Saga Assad. And all of you who have been with us all this time, if you celebrate a new year, the fiscal new year tonight, be safe. And again, to those of us that know that it isn't, but we're going out anyway, just stay alert and enjoy yourself as much. And look at the next day as it always is, and how much farther we got to go, those of us who know what's going on, to get to the point where we link up with the equinox and actually become new. So in that, say peace, love and light, and we'll see you next Monday. Peace.